The first blow was not a punch, but a lesson in physics. The young recruit, Miller, made the mistake of laying a hand on her arm. His intention was to pull her from the chair, a show of dominance for his friends. It was a mistake he would feel for a week. Ava's hand moved faster than he could process. She did not pull away. She twisted into the motion, her fingers becoming a vice around his wrist. Using his own forward momentum, she guided him down, his face meeting the cold, hard surface of the mess hall table with a sickening thud. He slid to the floor, clutching his face, a low groan escaping his lips. The entire event took less than 2 seconds. The arrogant smile on Larson's face did not so much fade as it shattered. The stunned silence that followed was heavier than any noise. The chaotic clatter of the mess hall had ceased. 200 pairs of eyes were locked on the scene. Larson, the de facto leader of this little pack, stared at his friend on the floor, then at the woman who was now slowly rising to her feet. Her movements were fluid, economical. There was no panic in her eyes, only a cold, analytical calm that was more terrifying than any glare of rage. "You bitch!" Larson snarled, the insult a reflex of his wounded pride. He lunged, a mass of muscle and fury, aiming a wild, powerful swing at her head. It was a brawler's move, all force and no technique. Ava did not block it. She flowed inside the arc of the punch, her body close to his. As his fist whistled past her ear, her left elbow drove like a piston into his solar plexus. The air exploded from his lungs in a pained whoosh. The fury in his eyes was instantly replaced by a wide, stunned shock. He doubled over, gasping like a fish out of water. The remaining 3 recruits, frozen for a critical second, now moved at once. It was their second critical mistake. They came at her as individuals, not a unit. The biggest one, a man named Carter, reached for her from behind. Ava didn't need to see him. She dropped her weight, bending her knees and driving her elbow straight back into his gut. He grunted, his grasp faltering. Pivoting on the ball of her foot, she brought the edge of her boot down hard on the instep of the recruit to her left. The sound of the impact was a sharp crack. He cried out, his leg buckling as he hopped back, clutching his foot. The 5th and final recruit, a younger man named Davis, stood his ground for a half-second, his hands coming up in a shaky, amateurish fighting stance. He was the only one who showed a flicker of hesitation. Ava's eyes locked with his. She saw the fear there. She gave him a single, almost imperceptible shake of her head. A warning. It was all the time Larson needed to suck in a ragged breath and make his final, foolish charge. He came at her low, trying to tackle her waist. Ava was ready. She met his charge not with resistance, but with redirection. She hooked her arm under his shoulder, used his own forward drive, and spun, using a classic hip throw. Larson flew through the air, landing flat on his back on the hard linoleum floor. The impact drove the last of the air from his lungs. Before he could even think to move, she was on him. One knee pressed firmly into his chest, not enough to break ribs, but enough to pin him completely. Her right fist was cocked back, poised an inch from his throat. The message was clear and utterly final. One twitch, and it would be over. The entire altercation, from the first move to the final pin, had lasted 58 seconds. 5 recruits, the pride of their training class, lay scattered around her, moaning, clutching their injuries. The mess hall was utterly, profoundly silent. You could hear the hum of the refrigerators. The only person standing was Petty Officer Eva Rostova, her breathing slightly elevated, her uniform still perfectly neat. She looked down at Larson, whose face was a mask of pain, shock, and dawning, horrifying comprehension. He was not looking at a woman he had underestimated. He was looking at a force of nature. He was looking at a professional. The silence in the mess hall was a physical presence, thick and heavy. It was broken by the sharp, authoritative click of boots on linoleum. Master Chief Warren, a man whose face seemed carved from old leather and whose eyes had seen every kind of foolishness a recruit could offer, walked slowly into the center of the devastation. He did not look at the groaning young man on the floor. His gaze was fixed on the woman who now stood calmly over Larson. Her chest rose and fell in a steady, controlled rhythm. She had not even broken a sweat. Warren stopped a few feet away, his hands on his hips. He let the silence stretch, allowing the scene to burn itself into the memory of every single person in the room. He looked down at Larson, who was still pinned by Eva's knee and the terrifying promise of her fist. "Recruit Larson." The Master Chief's voice was low, but it carried to the farthest corners of the hall. "It appears you have chosen today for your lesson in tactical humility, a costly one." He then shifted his gaze to Eva. "Petty Officer Rostova, I see you've decided to give our most promising recruits a practical demonstration." Eva gave a single sharp nod. She rose from Larson's chest in one smooth, effortless motion. She did not offer him a hand up. She simply took a step back, her posture returning to a relaxed parade rest, as if she had just finished a routine training exercise. The 5 recruits began to slowly, painfully pick themselves up. Miller held a napkin to his bloody nose. Carter was still trying to catch his breath. The one who had taken the boot to his instep was leaning heavily on a table. Larson simply lay on his back for a moment longer, staring at the ceiling tiles as if seeking answers. Master Chief Warren turned to address the entire mess hall. His voice boomed, leaving no room for doubt or question. "For those of you who are wondering what just happened, pay attention. This is Petty Officer First Class Eva Rostova. She is not, as some of you might have assumed, a logistics officer. She is not a clerk. She is a member of Naval Special Warfare." He paused, letting the term hang in the air. "She is a Navy SEAL." The word SEAL landed like a bomb. A collective, sharp intake of breath swept through the room. The recruits stared, their faces a canvas of disbelief, shame, and a new, raw respect. A woman, a SEAL. The math did not compute in their world, a world built on certain assumptions about strength and capability. Those assumptions now lay shattered on the floor, right alongside their pride. Warren continued, his eyes sweeping over the humbled faces of the 5 men. "You thought you were tough. You thought you were the best this facility had to offer. You saw someone you perceived as weaker, and you sought to assert your dominance like a pack of jackals. You failed to assess your target. You failed to understand the environment. You failed to act as a unit. You committed every basic tactical error in the book, and you were neutralized in under a minute by a single operator." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a deadly serious tone. "On a real battlefield, against a real enemy, you would all be dead. Let that sink in." He then gestured to Eva. "Petty Officer Rostova is here as part of a new instructor rotation. She will be responsible for teaching close-quarters combat and tactical decision-making. Her qualifications are beyond question. Her experience is something you cannot yet comprehend." He looked at Larson, who had finally managed to sit up. "Recruit, do you have anything to say to your new instructor?" Larson's face was pale. He looked from the Master Chief's stern face to Eva's impassive one. The arrogance was gone, completely burned away, leaving behind the hollowed-out shell of his ego. He struggled to his feet, wincing in pain. He straightened his back as best he could and looked directly at Eva. "Petty Officer Rostova," he said, his voice rough but clear. "My apologies. It will not happen again." Eva regarded him for a long moment. Her expression did not change, but there was a slight narrowing of her eyes, an intensity that seemed to look right through him. "See that it doesn't, recruit," she said, her voice calm and level. "The next lesson will be far less forgiving." She then turned and walked away, her boots making no sound on the floor. She did not look back at the wreckage she had left behind. She had a class to prepare for. The 5 recruits did not speak as they limped out of the mess hall. The usual post-training banter was dead. The silence between them was a heavy, uncomfortable shroud. Larson led the way, his body aching with every step, the ghost of her knee still pressing on his chest. He could still see her eyes, calm and utterly devoid of emotion, as she looked down at him. It wasn't anger he saw there, it was something far worse, disappointment. He had been judged and found lacking by a standard he didn't even know existed. They found an empty bench outside the barracks, collapsing onto it with a collective groan. Miller held an ice pack from the medic to his swollen nose. Carter massaged his bruised ribs. "A SEAL," Miller mumbled through the cloth. "How is that even possible? I didn't think. I mean, women aren't." His voice trailed off, the old assumption dying a painful death. "They are now," Larson said, his voice hollow. He stared at his own hands, the knuckles scraped from his fall. They were the hands of a strong man, but they had been useless against her precision. He thought of the way she moved, not like a fighter, but like a surgeon. Every motion had a purpose. Every strike was designed to disable, to end the threat with maximum efficiency and minimum effort. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever witnessed. "I heard a rumor," the recruit named Davis said quietly. He was the one who had hesitated, the one she had warned off with a look. "I heard from a corpsman that she was in Afghanistan. Not at some big base, but out in the Badlands, with a special operations team." The others looked at him, the pieces beginning to fall into a grim, awe-inspiring picture. This wasn't just some instructor who had mastered hand-to-hand combat in a sterile gym. This was a warrior who had tested her skills in the blood and dust of a real war zone. Larson remembered the way she had used his own momentum against him. He remembered the economy of her movement. This wasn't about being stronger. It was about being smarter, faster, more willing to do what was necessary. He thought of his own training, all about brute force and endurance. He and his friends had been playing a game. She had been practicing a craft. The difference was now brutally, embarrassingly clear. Back in her sparse quarters, Eva Rostova stood before the small mirror. She methodically checked her knuckles. A slight redness, nothing more. She ran through the encounter in her mind, not with pride, but with a critical, professional eye. Miller's grab, textbook neutralization, Larson's wild swing, predictable, easily countered. The others rushing in, undisciplined, a cascade of failures. It was a useful, if messy, demonstration. The Master Chief had been right. These boys needed to be broken down before they could be rebuilt into something useful. Her eyes drifted to a single photograph on her desk, tucked beside a stack of training manuals. It was not a picture of her fellow SEALs or a dramatic action shot. It was a faded picture of a young girl with solemn eyes, standing next to a woman with a tired but proud smile, both of them in front of a small, weathered house. That little girl had known fear. She had known what it was to be powerless, to have your fate decided by others. That was a feeling she had sworn to never experience again. It was a fire that had burned within her through every second of Hell Week, through every grueling mile, through every doubting stare. The recruits in the mess hall had not been attacking a woman. They had been poking a sleeping dragon, a creature forged in a fire they could not even imagine. And now, they knew what she was. The real work could finally begin. The next morning, the 5 recruits stood at a rigid, nervous attention on the training grounds. The air was cold, and a low fog clung to the earth, matching the chill in their bones. They watched as Petty Officer Rostova walked towards them, her stride economical and purposeful. She carried no notes, no clipboard. Her authority was in her posture, in the calm certainty of her gaze. She stopped before them, her eyes moving from one bruised and battered face to the next. "Recruits," she began, her voice cutting cleanly through the morning quiet. "Yesterday was not a fight. It was a diagnostic. I assessed your skills, or lack thereof. You rely on size and aggression. In the real world, that gets you and your teammates killed." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Your training, starting today, will be different. You will learn to think before you act. You will learn that violence is a tool, not a reaction. The first lesson is awareness." She walked down the line, stopping in front of Larson. "Recruit, how many windows are on the south side of the barracks behind me?" Larson's mind went blank. He had walked past that building 100 times. He had no idea. He stared straight ahead, his face burning. "I don't know, Petty Officer." She moved to Miller. "What was the name of the corpsman who gave you that ice pack?" Miller flinched. He had been too focused on his own pain to even look at the man's name tape. "I don't know, Petty Officer." She continued down the line, asking simple, brutal questions about their immediate environment that none of them could answer. They knew the broad strokes of their training, but not the details of their world. They were bulls, charging forward without seeing the fence posts. Ava finally returned to the front of the group. "You were so focused on me as a target in that mess hall, you saw nothing else. You didn't notice Master Chief Warren sitting in the corner. You didn't notice the two senior chiefs at the table behind you. You had tunnel vision. On an operation, that tunnel vision is what an enemy sniper uses to put a round through your team leader's head." She then began the physical training. It was not the calisthenics they were used to. It was a series of slow, deliberate movements. She demonstrated a simple wrist lock, breaking it down into its component parts: the angle of the hand, the distribution of weight, the precise point of pressure. She made them practice on each other with painstaking slowness. "Power is useless without control," she repeated, moving among them, adjusting a thumb placement here, a foot position there. "You must control the situation. To control the situation, you must first control yourself." Larson found himself paired with Davis. As he practiced the lock, his movements were clumsy, forced. He was still trying to use his strength. Ava appeared at his side. "Stop fighting him, Larson. Guide him." She placed her hands over his, her grip firm but not harsh. She moved his hands through the motion, showing him the flow. "Feel it. It's not a struggle. It's a redirect. You are using his energy, not your own." For a moment, Larson felt it, the smooth, efficient transfer of force. It was a revelation. He looked at her, and for a fleeting second, he saw not a conqueror, but a teacher. The anger and shame from the day before began to slowly transmute into something else, something harder, a determined, focused respect. The lesson had truly begun, and they were only just starting to understand how much they had to learn. A week passed. The bruises on the recruits' bodies faded from deep purple to a sickly yellow, but the memory of their failure remained sharp and clear. The training with Petty Officer Rostova was relentless, a daily dismantling of everything they thought they knew about combat. She drilled them on situational awareness until they could describe every car in the parking lot and quote the license plate of the chow truck. She forced them to practice disarming techniques until their wrists ached and their fingers were numb, her voice a constant, calm correction in their ears. Sloppy. Again. Precision, not power. The change in the 5 men was gradual but profound. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a watchful stillness. They spoke less and observed more. They no longer saw Ava as a mysterious and terrifying anomaly, but as a master of her craft. They began to see the logic in her teaching, the brutal elegance of a system designed for one thing only: survival. They started to notice things. The way she always positioned herself with a wall to her back in a room. The way her eyes constantly scanned, never resting on one thing for too long. She was a living lesson, and they were finally learning to read. The turning point came during a Nightland navigation exercise. The 5 recruits were a team, tasked with finding a series of markers in a vast, swampy training area. The fog had rolled in thick and cold, reducing visibility to mere feet. The compasses felt unreliable, and the familiar terrain became a disorienting maze. They were lost, cold, and arguing in hushed, tense voices. Larson wanted to push forward on their original bearing. Miller insisted they had veered off course an hour ago. The team was on the verge of fracturing. A twig snapped in the darkness behind them. They spun around, hearts hammering, their rifles coming up instinctively. Ava Rostova materialized from the fog as if she were a part of it. She wore no night vision goggles. Her face was calm. "You're loud," she stated simply. "I could hear you from 200 meters away. Sound carries in the fog. You might as well be shouting your position to the entire swamp." Larson felt a fresh wave of shame. They had failed again. "We're lost, Petty Officer," he admitted, the words tasting like ash. She didn't berate them. Instead, she stepped closer. "Stop looking at your maps. Look up." They glanced upward, seeing nothing but the oppressive gray of the fog. Not that far up. "Look at the trees." She pointed to a tall pine. "See how the moss grows thicker on one side? In this region, it almost always grows on the north side. It's not perfect, but it's a data point." She knelt, sweeping a hand over the damp ground. "See these animal tracks? They're heading in a consistent direction, towards water. Your target is near a creek. Use the environment. It will tell you everything you need to know if you stop fighting it and start listening." She spent the next hour with them, not leading them, but teaching them how to lead themselves. She showed them how to read the subtle lay of the land, how to use the sound of the wind in the leaves as a guide. It was a different kind of strength, a patient, intelligent strength they had never been taught. When they finally found the first marker, a small, reflective strip on a cypress tree, the feeling of accomplishment was deeper and more satisfying than any they had ever known. It was earned not through muscle, but through understanding. Larson looked at Eva, who stood silently observing them. He finally understood. Her lesson in the mess hall wasn't about showing them she was better. It was about showing them what better actually meant. It was a standard, and she was pulling them toward it, one grueling, foggy night at a time. The final phase of their training was a full-scale, force-on-force exercise. The 5 recruits, now operating with a quiet, focused synergy, were designated as the assault team. Their objective was to infiltrate a simulated enemy communications outpost, a cluster of weathered buildings deep in the training area, and secure a vital piece of intelligence. The opposing force, the aggressors, were seasoned instructors, men who knew every trick and would exploit any weakness. The recruits were nervous, but the frantic energy of before was gone, replaced by a methodical calm. They had a plan. They had contingencies, and they had a new way of thinking. They moved through the woods not as 5 individuals, but as a single entity. Larson, the point man, used the techniques Eva had taught him, pausing for long moments to listen and watch, reading the forest for signs of the enemy. Davis, behind him, covered the angles Larson couldn't see. They used hand signals she had drilled into them, silent and efficient. They avoided the obvious paths, moving instead through a drainage ditch that smelled of damp earth and decay, their movements slow and deliberate. They were listening to the environment just as she had shown them in the fog. They reached the outer perimeter of the outpost. Through his binoculars, Larson could see 2 aggressors patrolling lazily near the main entrance. The old him would have suggested a direct, aggressive assault. The new him looked for another way. He signaled to the team, pointing towards a ventilation shaft on the side of the building, partially obscured by brush. It was a tight, uncomfortable entry point. A week ago, they would have dismissed it as impossible. Now, they saw it as an opportunity. While Miller and Carter created a diversion by tossing a pebble against the far side of the compound, Larson and Davis silently pried the grate loose and slithered inside. The interior was dark and close, smelling of dust and old wiring. They moved through the crawl space, their training overriding the claustrophobia. They could hear the voices of the aggressors below them, confident and unsuspecting. They located the simulated communications room. The door was guarded. Larson looked at Davis, then gave a series of quick hand signals. They had practiced this. Davis created a noise down the hall. As the guard turned to investigate, Larson emerged from the shadows behind him. He didn't throw a punch. He applied a precise, controlled pressure to a nerve cluster on the man's neck. The aggressor slumped, stunned, and Larson gently lowered him to the floor. It was clean. It was quiet. It was exactly what she had taught them. They secured the intelligence, a dummy flash drive, and exfiltrated the same way they had come in, melting back into the woods before the aggressors even knew they had been breached. When they reached the extraction point, Master Chief Warren and Petty Officer Rostova were waiting for them. The Master Chief's face was unreadable. He took the flash drive from Larson. "Well," he grunted. "The objective is secure, Master Chief," Larson reported, his voice steady. "The outpost was neutralized. No shots were fired." Warren looked from Larson to the other four, seeing the quiet confidence in their eyes, the lack of celebratory swagger. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Good." He turned and walked away, leaving them alone with Ava. She looked at them, her gaze sweeping over each of them. The silence stretched, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was the silence of assessment, of judgment. Finally, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her mouth. It was there and gone in a heartbeat, but they all saw it. "You used the environment," she said. "You controlled the engagement. You completed the mission without unnecessary violence." She paused. "You operated like SEALs." In that moment, the last of the shame from the mess hall evaporated. The humiliation was transformed. It was no longer a story of their failure, but the prologue to their success. They had been broken down to nothing, and she had shown them how to rebuild themselves into something stronger, smarter, and more capable than they had ever imagined possible. They had learned the lesson. The graduation ceremony was a simple, solemn affair held on the main parade ground. The families were there, proud and beaming, but for Larson and the others, the most important audience was a single figure standing at ease beside Master Chief Warren. Petty Officer Eva Rostova wore her service dress uniform, the gold trident pin on her chest gleaming in the sun like a promise kept. She watched as the recruits, now officially graduated and assigned to their new units, received their certificates. There were handshakes and proud nods from the commanding officers, but the 5 men waited for one moment in particular. When the formalities concluded, Larson caught Eva's eye. He gave a slight nod towards a quiet spot away from the crowd. She acknowledged it with a barely perceptible tilt of her head. One by one, the 5 of them broke away from their families and gathered around her. The awkwardness was gone. The fear was gone. What remained was a profound, hard-won respect. Larson was the first to speak. He stood straight, looking her directly in the eye. "Petty Officer Rostova," he began, his voice clear and strong. "On behalf of all of us." "Thank you." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was immense. "What you did for us. What you taught us. It was more than tactics." He struggled to find the right words. "You showed us what it really means to be a warrior. You showed us that our biggest weakness wasn't our lack of skill, but our own arrogance. We won't forget it." Miller, his nose now fully healed, stepped forward. "I'm sorry, Petty Officer, for everything in the mess hall. I was an idiot." Eva looked at him, her expression as unreadable as ever, but her eyes held a glint of something softer than stone. "The mess hall is in the past, sailor," she said. "You have a future to concern yourselves with now. The training you received here is a foundation. What you build on it is up to you. Remember the lessons, the awareness, the control, the patience. They will keep you alive. They will keep your teams alive." Davis, the quiet one, surprised everyone by speaking up. "Petty Officer, if you don't mind me asking, why? Why put up with us? After what we did, you could have written us off. You could have had us scrubbing latrines for a month." For a long moment, Eva was silent. She looked past them, towards the horizon where the sky met the sea. "Because someone once saw potential in me when I was just a raw, angry recruit," she said, her voice quieter now, meant only for them. "They saw something worth saving, worth building. They didn't write me off. My duty is not to punish arrogance. My duty is to eliminate it and to replace it with competence. You 5 had talent. It was buried under a mountain of pride. My job was to dig it out." She turned her gaze back to them, and this time the pride was unmistakable. "And I have. You are no longer the men who cornered me in the mess hall. You are something better. Don't ever go back." She did not offer handshakes. That was not her way. Instead, she offered them a final sharp nod, a gesture of professional respect from one warrior to another. "Good luck at your next commands. Make them count." She then turned and walked away, her figure growing smaller as she moved across the vast parade ground. They watched her go, not with relief, but with a sense of solemn gratitude. She had been the anvil upon which they were hammered and reshaped. The memory of those 58 seconds was no longer a humiliation. It was the moment they were given a chance to become the warriors they were always meant to be. The story of the 5 recruits and the Navy SEAL did not end on that parade ground. It rippled outwards, changing the culture of the training facility. The new classes of recruits heard the story, a modern-day fable passed down in hushed tones. They never saw the messy confrontation, but they felt its aftermath. They saw a new standard of conduct, a quiet professionalism that had been absent before. The swaggering and bravado that had once been common were now met with cold disapproval, not from the instructors, but from the more senior recruits who had learned the hard way. The lesson of Petty Officer Rostova had been institutionalized. For Larson, Miller, Davis, and the others, the training was just the beginning. They were scattered to different units, to ships and bases across the globe, but they carried her lessons with them like a piece of essential gear. In Larson's first deployment, his squad was tasked with clearing a dense urban area. Intelligence was spotty. The old Larson would have led from the front, a bull charging forward. The new Larson remembered a foggy night and a lesson in listening. He held his team back, spending precious minutes observing the patterns of life in the street, the way a curtain twitched in an upper window, the unnatural stillness of a certain alley. He saw what others missed, a poorly concealed IED and a sniper's nest they would have walked right into. He didn't defeat the enemy with force that day. He defeated them with the patience she had beaten into him. Years later, Larson, now a seasoned chief petty officer himself, found himself assigned as an instructor at the very same facility. He walked the same halls, smelled the same smells of sweat and disinfectant. He saw a new generation of recruits, their eyes full of the same arrogant fire he once possessed. He knew his duty. One afternoon, he was observing a hand-to-hand combat session in the gym. A group of recruits were circling a lone female sailor, a new transfer with a quiet intensity that seemed familiar. They were joking, testing her, their movements edging towards intimidation. Larson felt a cold knot form in his stomach. History was poised to repeat itself. He watched as the young woman kept her eyes forward, her posture relaxed but ready. She reminded him of someone. He saw the lead recruit take a step too close, his hand coming up to give her a condescending pat on the shoulder. In that moment, Larson didn't intervene. He simply watched, a faint, knowing smile on his face. The recruit's hand never landed. In a movement so fast it was almost a blur, the young woman had control of his wrist, her body positioned for a throw that would end the confrontation before it began. She didn't execute it. She just held him there, frozen, her eyes locked on his, a silent, powerful warning. The other recruits backed away, their laughter dying in their throats. Later, Larson sought out the young sailor. She was in the library studying tactical manuals. "That was some move back there," he said. She looked up, her gaze clear and direct. "Thank you, Chief, it was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," Larson replied. "I knew someone who moved just like that. A SEAL. She taught me that the strongest weapon you have isn't your strength. It's your mind." The young woman gave a slow nod. "Petty Officer Rostova. She's a legend." Larson looked at this new sailor, at the potential simmering beneath her calm exterior, and he understood his purpose completely. The legacy was not just in the lessons taught, but in the lessons passed on. The story that began with 5 recruits in a mess hall was not over. It was just beginning a new chapter, and he was now the one who would help write it. The standard had been set, and it would be upheld.